The trial of Nnamdi Kanu, leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, ipob, has been moved to the headquarters of the Department of State Services, DSS. Justice James Omotosho ordered that Nnamdi Kanu's trial be moved from the Abuja Federal High Court to the DSS headquarters. The trial judge said the case was moved to the DSS headquarters to allow for the inspection of Nnamdi Kanu's shipping container. The container was said to have been used by Nnamdi Kanu to bring a radio transmitter into Nigeria for broadcast on Radio Biafra. The ipob leader is currently facing trial for terrorism due to his push for the actualization of Biafra. On June 13, 2025, during Nnamdi Kanu's ongoing trial, a 2021 radio broadcast by a man named Osama Benjamin, also called Oyami, was played in court. In the recording, Benjamin claimed that Nnamdi Kanu instructed him to kill 2,000 people, though he only managed to kill 30. This evidence is scheduled to be cross-examined by Nnamdi Kanu's legal team in upcoming sessions. The Department of State Services, DSS, told the Federal High Court in Abuja that Nnamdi Kanu used radio broadcasts to incite violence and enforce sit-at-home orders, which allegedly led to widespread economic shutdowns in southeastern Nigeria. A DSS operative testified that Nnamdi Kanu smuggled a radio transmitter into Nigeria to broadcast secessionist messages. A video of Nnamdi Kanu inspecting the transmitter was submitted as evidence, along with a flash drive containing relevant audio and video clips. Despite media headlines claiming the trial was moved permanently to the Department of State Services headquarters, the judge only ordered a temporary inspection of the radio transmitter and related equipment, which are kept at the DSS facility. The court ruled in favor of the prosecution's request to inspect the equipment, despite objections from the defense team about the admissibility and relevance of the evidence. The case was adjourned to allow for this inspection. However, a critic criticized the Nigeria federal government for its inconsistent and false allegations against Nnamdi Kanu over the years, starting with false claims about gun smuggling and now shifting to accusations about radio equipment. The critic emphasized that the equipment allegedly smuggled by Nnamdi Kanu was not dangerous or related to terrorism and should, at worst, be a customs violation, not grounds for terrorism charges. The critic strongly argued that Nnamdi Kanu is a political prisoner being persecuted for demanding self-determination, while former Boko Haram commanders are being rehabilitated despite committing actual violence and destruction. He revealed systemic ethnic bias, claiming the Nigerian state continues to victimize the Igbo ethnic group since the end of the Biafran War. He argued that the state tolerates terrorism in the north, but uses excessive military force in the southeast. He concluded by highlighting the irony that people who supported the Nigerian Civil War's violence are more accepted in society than those advocating for justice and Igbo self-determination, and condemned the continued militarization of the southeast compared to the north. It was a warm and tense morning in Abuja on the 13th day of June in the year 2025. A new chapter was being written in a courtroom saga that had already consumed the attention, emotions, and hopes of many people across Nigeria and beyond. The man at the center of the storm was Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, a movement that has captured both admiration and controversy for its pursuit of Biafran independence from the Nigerian state. Over the past few years, the name Nnamdi Kanu has grown from being whispered among activists to being debated in government circles, and now shouted by crowds on both sides of a bitter divide. It was on this particular Friday that the presiding judge, Justice James Omotosho, made a decision that sent ripples through the legal community and the political landscape of Nigeria. Justice James Omotosho, who has presided over several high-profile cases in Nigeria's Federal High Court in Abuja, issued a rather unexpected order. He directed that the ongoing trial of Nnamdi Kanu be moved from its usual courtroom setting at the Federal High Court in Abuja to a more controlled and secure location, the headquarters of the Department of State Services. The Department of State Services, often referred to by its initials as DSS, is Nigeria's elite domestic intelligence agency. It is a place shrouded in secrecy and marked by heavy security, far removed from the public glare of traditional courtrooms. The reason for this relocation was not about a change of venue for convenience or mere protocol. Justice James Omotosho explained that this shift was necessary to allow for a direct inspection of an important piece of evidence, a shipping container. According to the prosecution, this shipping container was used by Nnamdi Kanu to bring a radio transmitter into Nigeria. This transmitter was later used, they claim, to power the controversial broadcasts on Radio Biafra, a station that the Nigerian government has accused of spreading messages that incite violence and promote secession. Inside the courtroom, the announcement drew varied reactions. Supporters of Nnamdi Kanu murmured in disbelief, their faces tightening with concern. Some members of the public gallery, already wary of the DSS due to previous reports of alleged human rights abuses, feared that this move would limit transparency and make it more difficult for the public to follow the proceedings. On the other hand, legal officers from the Department of State Services nodded with quiet approval, convinced that their facility was better suited for handling such sensitive evidence. Nnamdi Kanu sat quietly in the defendant's chair, his expression unreadable. Dressed in a simple white outfit, he bore the calm demeanor of a man who has become used to courtroom surprises. But even those closest to him knew that this was not a routine day. His legal team, led by experienced defense lawyers who have followed his case for years, stood up to object. They raised concerns about the admissibility of the evidence and the fairness of holding proceedings within the DSS complex. They argued that this move would give undue influence to the prosecution, who are closely aligned with the Department of State Services. Despite their objections, Justice James Omotosho ruled in favor of the prosecution's request. He stated that the court had the right to inspect physical evidence wherever it is located, especially if such evidence is considered vital to the understanding of the case. With that decision, the wheels were set in motion. The next court session would be held not at the Federal High Court, but deep within the high-security compound of the Department of State Services headquarters. As news of the decision spread, it quickly became the subject of headlines across Nigeria. Media houses carried bold captions claiming the trial had been permanently moved to the Department of State Services facility. But legal analysts quickly clarified that the relocation was temporary, only for the purpose of inspecting the radio transmitter and the shipping container that brought it into Nigeria. Meanwhile, the details emerging from the courtroom painted a far more intricate and sensitive picture than headlines could capture. During the session, the prosecution presented an audio recording from the year 2021, which they claimed was a key piece of evidence. In the recording, a man identified as Osama Benjamin, also known by the alias Oyami, made a startling confession. He alleged that Nnamdi Kanu had instructed him to kill 2,000 people. However, he admitted that he had only been able to kill 30. The courtroom grew tense as the recording played. Some observers shook their heads in disbelief. Others looked toward Nnamdi Kanu to gauge his reaction, but he remained still, refusing to show emotion. The prosecution argued that this confession, though made years ago, was a clear example of the violent ideology allegedly promoted by the indigenous people of Biafra under the leadership of Nnamdi Kanu. They were determined to challenge every piece of evidence, question every witness, and expose every inconsistency in the government's narrative. They maintained that Nnamdi Kanu was a prisoner of conscience and that the trial was nothing more than a political witch hunt disguised as a legal proceeding. As for the indigenous people of Biafra supporters, the news brought mixed feelings. Many of them viewed the DSS headquarters as hostile ground, a place where Nnamdi Kanu had already endured months of solitary confinement, restricted access to his legal team, and questionable treatment by security operatives. They feared that holding even part of the trial in that facility would only deepen the lack of transparency and fairness. Yet others remained hopeful that the truth would eventually emerge, that the court would see through the alleged fabrication, and that Nnamdi Kanu would regain his freedom and return to lead his people in the ideological struggle for Biafran self-determination. All across Nigeria and among diaspora communities in Europe, the United States and elsewhere, the eyes of many remained fixed on the developments surrounding Nnamdi Kanu's trial. Conversations in churches, markets, offices, and public gatherings often drifted toward the topic. Some saw him as a revolutionary hero, the voice of a silenced people, while others viewed him with suspicion and blamed him for the unrest in the southeast. As the date for the next hearing approached, more questions than answers hovered in the air. Would the evidence at the Department of State Services headquarters hold up under scrutiny? Would the defense team succeed in discrediting the recordings and videos presented by the prosecution? And most importantly, would justice be served, or would this case, like so many others in Nigeria's complex history, be decided not by the strength of evidence, but by the weight of political influence? Only time would tell. But for now, the trial of Nnamdi Kanu had taken yet another dramatic turn, drawing even more attention to a case that has come to symbolize not only a legal dispute, but the deeper, unresolved questions about identity, power, fairness, and the future of Nigeria. As the days rolled on after the trial was moved to the Department of State Services headquarters, tension continued to rise across Nigeria, especially in the southeast region where Nnamdi Kanu's influence is felt most deeply. The decision by Justice James Omotosho to allow the inspection of the shipping container and radio transmitter at the headquarters of the Department of State Services was not just seen as a procedural matter. For many observers, it was a symbolic shift in how justice is being administered in Nigeria. To some, it appeared as though the courtroom had now been absorbed into the very heart of the intelligence agency, creating fears that transparency was slowly being replaced by secrecy. Legal experts began to debate the implications of such a move. In law schools and public policy forums, students and scholars dissected the judge's ruling. They questioned whether it was proper for a court to carry out judicial proceedings inside a facility that is under the control of the prosecution. Some argued that this blurred the line between the state's role as prosecutor and the independence of the judiciary. Others warned that it set a dangerous precedent where politically sensitive trials could be quietly relocated to locations where public access was limited, and where the balance of power could be tilted in favor of the state. In the meantime, inside the DSS facility, preparations were underway for the inspection of the shipping container and the equipment that had been seized. This was not just any radio equipment, the prosecution claimed. It was said to be the main tool that Nnamdi Kanu used to broadcast messages on Radio Biafra, a station that operated from different locations across Europe and Africa. According to investigators from the Department of State Services, the radio equipment had been smuggled into the country in a manner designed to avoid detection by customs officers. The device was reportedly powerful enough to reach vast parts of southern Nigeria and had been cleverly installed in a hidden location before being discovered by operatives. The defense team, however, remained skeptical. They stated that even if such a device existed and had been brought into the country, there was no evidence to show that it was used for any criminal purpose. They argued that broadcasting messages, even if they were critical of the government, did not amount to terrorism. They pointed out that many radio stations in Nigeria criticize the government every day, and that it was unconstitutional to charge someone with terrorism simply because of political speech. Nnamdi Kanu's lead attorney, who has represented political prisoners in the past, described the entire situation as a political vendetta disguised as a legal matter. He said the prosecution had failed to produce any evidence showing that Nnamdi Kanu had instructed anyone to commit violence. He emphasized that no fingerprints, no handwritten notes, and no direct communication had been presented to link Nnamdi Kanu to the violence that occurred during the sit-at-home orders. According to him, the voice recordings being used by the prosecution were either doctored or taken out of context. In the audio clip played during the previous court session, Osama Benjamin, also called Oyami, claimed he was told to kill 2,000 people, but only managed to kill 30. The defense team said that if this confession were real, then Osama Benjamin should be the one on trial for murder. They asked why the government had not arrested and charged the man making the confession, but had instead used his voice recording as a tool to indict Nnamdi Kanu. To them, it was further proof that the trial was being manipulated for political gain. Outside the court, protests began to swell. In cities like Onitsha, Aba, Enugu, and Owerri, large crowds of supporters began holding daily vigils. People carried placards demanding the immediate release of Nnamdi Kanu. Mothers wept openly, chanting prayers and calling on international bodies like the United Nations and Amnesty International to intervene. Some of the signs read, "Freedom for Nnamdi Kanu is freedom for justice," and "A transmitter is not a weapon." Others simply bore his image, framed by slogans declaring him the only voice left for the Igbo people. As tensions mounted, so did the security presence. In Abuja, heavily armed officers patrolled the areas surrounding the Federal High Court and the DSS headquarters. Convoys of black vans moved in and out of the complex as journalists were kept behind barriers. Some media houses complained that they were not allowed access to observe the inspection process, accusing the government of orchestrating a trial behind closed doors. In response, the spokesperson for the Department of State Services issued a carefully worded statement. The statement insisted that the relocation of the trial was legal and temporary, and that the DSS was only obeying the court's order. It also mentioned that the media's access was restricted to ensure the safety and integrity of the evidence being inspected. According to the Department of State Services, national security concerns overrode the need for full public access in such cases. Still, the public was not convinced. Social media erupted with hashtags like Free Nnamdi Kanu and hashtag Justice for Biafra, trending not only in Nigeria but among diaspora communities in the United Kingdom, the United States, Germany, Canada, and South Africa. Well-known celebrities and activists began to weigh in. A popular Nollywood actor posted a video saying that the government had gone too far. A former Minister of Aviation published a long article accusing the current administration of fanning the flames of ethnic division through its handling of Nnamdi Kanu's case. Even in the international community, quiet murmurs began to grow louder. A member of the European Parliament raised a question during a session, asking whether the Nigerian government was respecting human rights in the ongoing trial. Meanwhile, the radio transmitter, and the shipping container at the center of the trial remained under heavy scrutiny. This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.